Democratic vice presidential candidate who sat on the winning ticket, well, that guy who negotiated the last fiscal stalemates, well, he's still the vice president. But his silence is deafening. The president should have him out there at least trying to corral the Senate into working with the House. That's his job. He's the president of the Senate. He's not up there just to bang a gavel. He has a job to do. And frankly, I think the president is making a mistake in not having him speak to the House. Meanwhile, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid is making sure that Biden remains silent. Seems that CNN's Gloria Borger reported he's made that very point clear, both inside and outside of the White House. And as one administration official put it, Reid is convinced he needs to stand his ground. Well, here are the numbers, my friends. 159. That's the Dow's clip on Tuesday. It rose 24 points this morning with the expectation of the nomination of Janet Yellen, Dr. Janet Yellen, to be the next chair of the Federal Reserve. 0.355. That's the interest rate of the Treasury bill sold at auction yesterday. 300. That's the percentage increase of the rate of Treasury bills from last week. 2,000. That's the number of workers stranded at the Grand Canyon. 2,000 workers. 27,000. That's the number of furloughed workers collecting unemployment insurance in the D.C. area alone. The D.C. crisis could jumpstart the case of reform. Yesterday, it was reported that the $100,000 government benefit to assist each family with burial and reclaiming the body is going to unpaid because of the shutdown. Well, the president has promised action to pay benefits to survivors of military men and women killed in action. Well, today, the White House spokesman Jay Carney and the president were disturbed to find out that it was not being paid, and has directed the Pentagon and other officials to figure out ways to address the problem. Even so, there's no excuse, Mr. President, that you don't know about this. The military, you're the commander-in-chief, and the commander-in-chief always knows what's going on with his personnel, whether he does or not. And you got caught, sir. You got caught. Well, not long after the flag-draped coffins of 4 Americans killed in combat arrived this morning at Delaware's Dover Air Force Base, the Pentagon announced that a private charity would restore the death benefits for the families of military members who died while on active duty. But that quick action did little to calm the families' ire and stop the finger-pointing between the Obama administration and Republicans about a government failure whose effect was deeply symbolic and immediately felt by bereft parents, grieving spouses, and children left without their parents. More than 24 men and women on active military duty have died since the federal government shutdown began last Tuesday, October 1st. The $100,000 in so-called death gratuities paid to their survivors within 36 hours was one of the many key programs placed on hold because of the stalemate in Washington. Retired sheet metal worker Jerry Peters, 71, lost his step-grandson Sunday when a bomb went off during combat operations, killing Army Special Agent Joseph M. Peters and 3 others in Kandahar province in Afghanistan. The elder Peters, a soft-spoken union member who lives in Republic, Missouri, said he was furious about the shutdown and its effect on his family. It's bad enough to have lost his grandson, but he says this final indignity is all about politics. The soldier leaves behind his wife, Ashley, and his 20-month-old son, Gabrielle. He had just been promoted to sergeant in August. Joseph Peters died just 2 weeks before he was scheduled to return home, according to the Operation Support Ashley and Gabrielle Facebook page, which is now raising donations and planning an online auction. This man lost his life, and worst of all, his son is going to grow up without his father. Meanwhile, you got a bunch of grown men in Washington, D.C. behaving like children. I'm a supporter of this administration, but I don't like what this administration is doing. More importantly, what it is not doing. You know, there's a time to stand your ground. There's a time to step in and say, we've got to work in it. We've got to do it now. We can't not afford another delay. More people are going to get hurt. And not just overseas, but right here in this country. And we're already feeling the effects. Well, earlier today the House did step in and voted unanimously. Now we're waiting on the Senate, from the last I heard. But we've got to put this stalemate beside us. We've got to figure out a common ground. And one thing I've learned in the last few months, actually in the last couple of years, of the growing difference in philosophies in this country, is that we're still fighting the Civil War. I think we've always been at a civil war. It just didn't have a name until 1860, where you have one side that wants it their way and you have one side that wants the other way. Basically, instead of states' rights, it's more about individual liberties versus, well, I guess it is really still about state rights to a certain extent. You know, there are pluses and minuses to a decentralized government, but the problem with that is you can't come to an agreement when 50 states are involved, as we are seeing now. With a centralized government, you have the danger of a government speaking on behalf of 50 states where someone in a state, say 37, 43, 26, may not agree with all the other 47 states. And we're seeing differences in philosophy. And now the philosophy of differences is not about slavery, but it is still about economics, in that you still have this faction that believes that people should be autonomous and should not rely upon the government to pay for their needs. And for the majority of us, that's probably true. But no matter how big your society is, you're always going to have a segment that is going to need some help. You know, you could have a population of 100,000 or of 100 million or 100 billion. But whatever the case might be, you're always going to have a segment that is going to need a helping hand. And that's the reality of the situation. So we got to figure out a way to blend these two together and make it work again. Yes, we have to get our spending under control. But we should not cut off those that are deemed an infection on our society either. Because I know of people that are good, patriotic Americans who have done their part, who have sacrificed their bodies, their health, their lives to make a living, but now for whatever reason are no longer able to do that through physical disabilities that were no fault of their own. They should not be punished just because you're a cheap bastard. Okay? So we've got to find a common ground in here. And along that line, this is a disturbing trend. Recipients in North Carolina who have not yet picked up their food stamps for October are now SOL. The state announced that it doesn't have the money to provide the 20% of benefactors for the Women, Infants, and Children's Food Program, the WIC program, who have yet to collect this month's supplement. That's according to the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Yesterday, I believe it was, I reported that the state of Arizona opted to not pay over 5,700 people food stamps because it doesn't have the money, and it's not willing to go into state coffers to compensate them until the federal government gets its act together and goes back to paying them. And we're going to see more and more cases like this if this crisis continues much longer. CIA agents responsible for undercover work, counterintelligence, and intelligence gathering are being called back to work because of the threat to the safety of human life. That's according to Director John Brennan, who wrote a memo to CIA employees. This does not mean that we have to recall all of our employees, but we only have the ability to recall workers involved directly in our core missions. A small business that fights wildfires in the western United States has laid off a dozen workers since the shutdown. With 80% of its business coming from government contracts, Mark Masters, owner of Coletta Fire, said he lost tens of thousands of dollars in the last week alone. And the stalemate continues. Pentagon Comptroller Robert Hale warned in late September that military death benefit payments would be delayed for families of troops who were killed during a government shutdown. That may well be true, but the Obama administration should have noticed this. Someone should have spoken up and said, Mr. President, this is a real possibility, and we need to correct this before it gets out of hand. The President did nothing. Now, I still contend that this isn't the fault of the Democrats alone, or the Republicans alone, but this is the fault of lazy Americans who are eligible to vote, but have chosen not to participate. Now, I don't want it to be mandatory that everybody vote in this country. But if you chose not to vote, you are part of the problem, a big part of the problem. Typically, the people that do not vote are already dissatisfied with their government and feel like their voice has very little impact. Well, I'm here to tell you, I think more of you need to speak up. And the fact that you're speaking through groups like the Tea Party or variations thereof scares me even more. Okay? Because you're pissed off at the country, but you're not willing to participate in the process. Well, you've got to participate. And I used to feel that if you didn't participate, okay, well, you can still speak up. And I still feel that way, but I don't think your voice carries much clout. Because if you're not going to participate in the process, it's like one of my mentors by proxy said on radio, if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem. And that's what I see with apathetic voters. I admit there have been times in my life that I have been apathetic toward the political process. And I admit for a while I did not vote, and I'm ashamed of myself for that. But a few years ago, at the behest of several friends and of the process that was going on, I decided to get back involved into it and realized that I was doing myself, and more importantly, my country, a disservice by not speaking my mind. I still pay my taxes, so it only makes sense that I should still continue to express my opinion about the direction of my government, and therefore I have to and I must speak out. And the best way to do that is through the polls. Okay? Now, given my stance that I've made on this program and on Facebook posts and so forth, most people know where I stand. But when it comes to actually voting, that is still my privacy. That's still my privilege. And after what happened after the November 2012 general elections, I have opted not to discuss who I'm voting for, what issues I'm voting on anymore. It's created too much tension in this country, and frankly, if your friendship or your loyalty to a family member is contingent upon where they stand or what they vote upon, then they aren't much of a friend. And I admit I have lost a few friends over the last few days because of my political stance. But, those relationships were already damaged before this. Okay? We're free to disagree. But if we can't find a mutual ground, then maybe our relationship isn't that strong to begin with. Now, I have some dear friends who we are polar opposites on religion and politics, and we get along great otherwise. And we know what subjects not to bring up. All right? And one of them is my very dear friend Chris Mayer. Oddly enough, she's probably my best friend. I would say my best friend that I've ever had. And yet we do not agree on politics or religion in most cases. But we still respect each other. And that's what makes this country great. And we need more friendships like that. And that's not to say that I don't listen to her, or that she doesn't listen to me. It's just that we come from, different backgrounds in that regard. And more people need to take the time to figure out those differences.